If you're watching this video, you might be in the position I was in not too long ago, thinking about getting into this field of data science, but feeling a little bit intimidated at this prospect of having to know maths, coding, and if you don't have a background in this stuff, wondering if you could ever break into this field. Listen, I completely get it. I went through that same situation myself, and now I'm a data scientist with an actual job and everything. The whole process took me about 2 years, but honestly, that could have been cut down by at least a year, maybe even a year and a half to make it take 6 months. And even though I'm at the beginning of my career, and I can't promise to get you into FANG or anything like that, I think perhaps I could help a couple people get from knowing nothing to getting one step closer to getting a job in just a few months. So here's how I would learn data science in 2023 if I had to start from scratch. And just a heads up, I did go to university for data science, but for this video, I'm gonna assume you wanna go down the self-taught route. Honestly, if I had to restart, I still would go to uni just because it makes it easier to find some jobs where they just want you to be able to tick that box that you went to uni. But like I said, let's assume you're going self-taught because you can still make it that way. The first step is just to learn what data science is. Okay, don't skip this step. I know it might seem like a no-brainer, but just taking the time to really understand what data science is and how it's used by businesses is really important. Trust me, I made the mistake of just jumping straight into it thinking I knew what data science was. Big mistake. Don't assume that data science is just about coding and maths and then just jump straight into learning that stuff, okay? Take time, it doesn't have to be a long time, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, to make sure you concretely understand what data science is, why businesses care about data science, and how it's used in different contexts and domains. It might even be worth just going onto YouTube and looking up a really long tutorial and treating that as a walkthrough about what your day-to-day life would look like, where you have to build projects to provide value. Because nowadays, with stuff like ChatGPT on the rise, just knowing how to code isn't enough. You have to know what you're doing, when to implement a certain style of code to get a certain result, and why you're doing that. So again, don't jump straight into coding. Take time to understand what data science is. Okay, step 2. Now that we know what data science is, let's jump straight into coding. Data science is such a broad field that in some jobs, you'll be coding literally every minute of every day, basically, and in others, you'll only be doing that once in a while. But you have to know what coding is and how to do it to some extent, at least. That's why it's important to have a baseline language. Now, most people say it doesn't matter whether you know R or Python first, and most jobs will say you just have to know one or the other. But if you had to learn one, it's Python, let's be real. Python is the more used one across the industry. That's just a fact. And Python is such a broad programming language, I find it funny when people are like, oh, go learn Python. It's like, what parts of Python am I going to use as a data scientist? Could you be specific, please? And honestly, the education system gets a lot of flack, but university was actually really useful because they taught us the basics first, the basics of coding, and it made it so much easier to build on top of that. So this is exactly what I would learn and when. So when you're first learning, forget about libraries and knowing how to build a model or anything like that. Just learn how Python works as a programming language. The best ways to start is download something like VS Code and you can explore Python in there. And especially if your laptop is not that powerful, you can use something like Google Colab instead, which is free and really powerful. And just take time to explore the language. Okay, so here's a list on screen of what I would focus on when learning Python and roughly in what order I would do it. And trust me, the first thing I would learn is data types, because if you're anything like me, most of your errors when you start off with will be because you're using the wrong data type. And if you're learning in 2023, you're in luck because now you have ChatGPT. Back in my day, we had to look on Stack Overflow to find our errors. But as much as possible, please, as a beginner, don't overly rely on ChatGPT. Use it to teach you how to code, not just whack stuff in ChatGPT and assume you've learned from that. Make sure you're asking it to explain to you what was done and why. And also, just so you know, it's not always correct, so just be careful of that. And after learning data types, move on to assigning variables, lists, dictionaries, working with data frames, and then how to do simple procedures like for loops, while loops, as well as defining functions and how to put in different arguments and defaults in there. If right now you're like, oh, this sounds really complicated, trust me, it's not. You're just hearing new terms, so it might sound a little bit difficult, but once you get started, you can do this stuff, trust me. And at this stage when you're just learning, you really only need 2 libraries, Pandas and NumPy. Pandas to work with data frames and what have you, load in your CSVs, and NumPy to do mathematical procedures. And maybe a visualization library like Matplotlib, but I prefer Plotly because it's a little bit sexier. But really you can do so much with just those 3 libraries. Now that we know this baseline level of Python, the next thing is to do a project. And here, wait, this really, come over here. Right, we're up close and personal, okay? I would just kind of listen to other people saying do projects, but I wouldn't actually do the projects. Because when you're learning tutorials, the temptation is to just keep learning more and more and being like, oh, I get that. Or if you do start a project, you'll be really tempted whenever you get stuck to just be like, oh, I got stuck there, but I kind of know what I'm doing. No, don't do that. Slowly go through the project. Make sure you know how to do everything because you want a strong foundation. It's going to make everything so much easier when you go forward. Okay. Here's a little project to get you started, okay? Assume you're a marketing data scientist and you want to code a function that takes in a data frame, and the function should check whether the data frame has a sales column and a website traffic column. And the job of the function is that it should be able to divide those two in order to get the conversion rate, and then also say whether that rate is trending up or down. And that should be in a separate column. Okay, simple project, you can do that one to start off with. If you get stuck and you've actually been trying, try use ChatGPT to see if it can help you out, and double check whether what it produced is correct by putting in an actual data frame and seeing if it works. Step 3, maths. So now we have the building blocks of Python. The next step is to look at the mathematical element. Because once again, it's such a broad field. Maybe your job will need maths, maybe it will need a little bit less maths, but being at least okay at maths is very important. I have this video over here which goes in depth telling you exactly what mathematical topics you need, so check that one out after this. So I won't go too much in detail, and if you're panicking, be like, oh, I'm bad at maths. Maths is a skill. Anything that is a skill can be learned and improved, okay? I don't speak any Italian, but if I practice 2 hours a day for the next year, in a year, don't you think I'll be at least okay at Italian? It's the same thing for maths, except you're much better off because even if you're bad at maths, you have a foundation in it from high school and even just life in general, okay? So don't panic about the maths. Okay, so now that you know these basics of Python, as well as mathematics, just do another simple project, more simple projects, building up. Maybe code a calculator. Python does the calculations for you, so just make sure it's a nice input interface. And maybe do something like coding a function that manually differentiates a polynomial, which is, again, pretty easy. You can do that just to get started off with, baby steps, and we'll keep building up and up on top of that. Okay, so now we have the basics nailed on. So now I want you to do more in-depth projects. So again, assume that you're a marketing data scientist. What I want you to do is go on to Kaggle. Kaggle is a website you're going to have to familiarize yourself with. Basically, it gives you free data. So just go on to Kaggle, type in like marketing data set or something like that, and literally just explore it. Imagine yourself as a data scientist for a marketing company and ask yourself, what could the manager ask me to output from this data? And just pretend like they've given you that assignment and create a project based around that. If that feels like too much to be able to dictate to yourself what to do, again, go on YouTube and just look up a long form tutorial where somebody goes through a marketing data set. There's a couple of really good ones. I'll probably link them on screen or in the description. Just do those step by step. You start off by following others and eventually you'll be able to do it yourself. Other things that are really important, just learn how to read documentation for libraries, because a lot of times for future projects, the more complicated stuff, you'll have to look up libraries which are a little bit less common. So you have to be able to read the documentation and interpret exactly what they want. That's not a big step, it won't take you that long. From this point, it's hard to direct you exactly what you should do now because you have the basics. All you have to do is explore your interests, okay? So if you want to be a tech data scientist, go on Kaggle, look for tech-related projects, or brainstorm stuff that you'd like to know for yourself. If you want to be a healthcare data scientist, again, Kaggle, healthcare dataset, and create a project around that, okay? And all these projects we're adding to our GitHub, so take a little bit of time to learn how to upload your repos to GitHub. Not too complicated, that's something I'm also solidifying in myself in 2023. But honestly, in a day, probably less than that, you should be pretty good with just uploading projects onto GitHub. Because especially as a self-taught data scientist, you're gonna have to have a strong portfolio. So after doing 2, maybe 3 more larger projects, now move on to understanding APIs. So APIs is basically like a fancy library. It just lets you access data, usually from online sites like Twitter or YouTube, or most websites have APIs, so even like Genius have their own API, and I'll be doing a project around that coming soon on the channel. And just keep exploring, see what data that API can bring you, do a project around that, and now you're getting familiar with using APIs. Okay, after that point, I would advise going down the machine learning route, at least knowing the basics of how to do some machine learning algorithms, how it basically works, what it is. And that's such a broad subfield or actual field of data science, so you can explore that when you come to it. And honestly, with just that, Python, and a base level of maths, you can start applying at least for entry-level jobs and internships. When you're starting off, you might not get the ideal job that you want, but just get that first job. Once you have that first job, you're on the ladder. It's easier to go to the next one and to the next one, especially as a self-taught data scientist. Just make sure that your portfolio looks good. And by looks good, I don't mean you have 20 random projects. Have like maybe 2 or 3 really good in-depth projects for your portfolio. You know, the ones we were working on before. If you can target them towards the exact sector that you want to apply to, that will help a lot. And have that on your GitHub. And if you have a personal website like I do or something like that, that will really help to show off what you can do. Now, one thing I will mention, and this point is often overlooked by data scientists, is learning SQL is really useful. Not all data scientist roles require SQL, but just knowing it and how it functions, it's super good to be able to put on your CV. Because a lot of the times you might get unstructured data or exports of data from different sources and you have to join them. You could technically do most of that in Python, but honestly, just being able to do it in a different language is really useful, and honestly, I find it easier. SQL is a lot easier to learn than Python, so it shouldn't take you too long, so it will be really useful to put that on your CV. All that's left now is to fix up your CV, and I'm actually in the process of reworking mine just in case I have to apply for a job, you know, always gotta stay sharp. And I will be talking about CV stuff on the channel soon, but basically just put your most relevant experience near the top, show off your portfolios, and really target it towards the job that you're applying for. So that's basically what I think you should do if you want to learn data science in 2023. But there's no one size fits all solution, so tweak these things. If you feel like learning one aspect first before that one or after that one will be better for you, then do it that way, okay? All that matters is that eventually you get to the point where you feel like you can do some data science work. If you want more detail on exactly what maths and what coding to do, these videos are linked now. But besides that, I'm Data Nash, a data scientist on his journey from being a newbie to one day being an elite data scientist. So if you want to join that journey and learn from my mistakes, see what I succeed at, feel free to hit subscribe. Peace.